Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me. I'm actually on Zoom live streaming to Facebook. So I hope this works. Yeah, I've got three things: Zoom, Facebook, PowerPoint. So I hope they're all feeling cooperative today. I'm delighted that you are taking time out of your schedules to hear my talk, which is about slow thinking in dogs, particularly for dogs who struggle with aggression or hyper reactivity. So I wanted to introduce myself. Then I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint and you'll only be able to see me in a little box up at the top of the screen. I'm Laura Donaldson, and I am a certified dog behavior consultant, a Karen Pryor certified training partner, Control Unleashed certified instructor. And I am retired from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. I have a full-time behavior consulting business, Four Paws, Four Directions dog training. And I'm not going to take the time to pause on that slide, but the first slide in the PowerPoint is my contact information. So if you have any questions or you want to contact me, please feel free to do that. Just go to my website or email me, either one. So I hope people are coming in. I can't see the comments. That is the big negative of doing a presentation this way on Facebook. But hopefully we'll have some time at the end where I can actually look at the questions and see what people's immediate issues are and respond. So without further ado, I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. And let me just say, okay, this is a new way of thinking about dealing with aggressive behavior in dogs. And actually, it's something you could use for many behavior issues, not just aggression, but it comes out of my own search for better ways to deal with aggressive behavior, because honestly, traditional desensitization, counter conditioning just were not working that well for me. And I've written about why I found that to be true, and how I might change things. So I'm not going to actually talk about that today. But because this is a fairly new way of thinking about aggressive behavior, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time setting it up. So the second part of the video is where the videos of the dogs and the stories come in. So please just bear with me during the first part where I'm trying to articulate the framework. So let me get started. And of course, there's a share screen. All right. Okay. Slow thinking is life-saving in dogs, why it's important, and how to teach it. So this is the slide with all my information on it. I'm not going to really talk about that, but I wanted to put this in there for your information and also so you could contact me. So actually, we can't talk about slow thinking until we talk about fast thinking. And Fast thinking in real life is something we engage in all the time. And here's a great example of it. Let's say you see a person, and from their really unhappy, angry expression, you sense that they are about to say something very unkind to you in a loud and accusatory tone. A premonition of what the person will do next comes to mind pretty automatically and effortlessly. We don't intend to really assess the person's mood. That is, we don't think, oh, I'm going to assess that person's mood. And we don't intend to anticipate what they might do. It just happens. And it happens very quickly. And this is an instance of fast thinking. It's actually a very common instance of fast thinking because we do this all the time with people, not just when they look unhappy, but with all kinds of emotions. And dogs actually do this too. Dogs do something very similar. They see another dog on leash and they habitually jump to the conclusion that the other dog is scary and threatening, just like this dog is doing in the picture. And it may be a small dog, but if you notice, it's pulling their handler off of her feet. So I've talked about this in other contexts as a cognitive distortion, but it is a cognitive distortion that comes out of fast thinking. Well, what is fast thinking? I definitely don't want to make fast thinking the villain because honestly, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to live. It just makes life possible because there are thousands of decisions that we make every day that we don't think about and we shouldn't be thinking about. So in a really important way, fast thinking enables life. And here are only some of the behaviors that depend on fast thinking: driving a car, riding a bicycle, playing the guitar or any musical instrument, lifting a fork to your mouth so you can eat a meal, and absolutely reading this PowerPoint slide, because fast thinking determines which direction we process the words: left to right, right to left. That is a fast thinking decision. Other attributes of fast thinking: it's very, very fast. Clearly, has to be. It uses parallel processing, and it's much like what we humans call multitasking. It's pretty automatic, and it's almost always subconscious. It also requires minimal cognitive effort. That is, there are not many brain resources that are devoted to fast thinking. Now, the problem with fast thinking comes with the fact that it can often be inaccurate. Maybe that person you saw on the street was not going to say something loud and accusatory, but come up and congratulate you on some accomplishment you've had. And this is part of the way fast thinking also enables what are called judgment biases, or the quick stereotyping that is involved in many dysfunctional social interactions. Fast thinking is very complicit in aggressive behavior, because aggressive behavior in both human and non-human animals frequently results from the faulty cognitive processing of social information. and also an inaccurate reading of external social cues. That little dog we saw who was pulling their handler off of her feet was doing what I call really bad risk assessment and actually reading the social information surrounding that other dog inaccurately. Because if you notice the other dog, they were pretty chilled out. They're saying, wait, what are you doing? What I call fast twitch thinking is a critical and often overlooked and under theorized component of aggression in all of its forms. So slow thinking is life-saving. What do I mean by that? Well, because jumping to conclusions or utilizing fast twitch decision-making is actually one of the most critical issues for dogs. After all, if a dog jumps to a conclusion and delivers a bite, it can be very difficult to recover from, both for the victim and the dog. Jumping to the wrong conclusions has actually cost many dogs their lives because it makes them very vulnerable to losing their homes, being relinquished to a shelter, and even makes them vulnerable to euthanasia. And it is exactly in these sorts of circumstances that a deliberate intervention of slow thinking can literally be life-saving. So slow thinking, unlike fast twitch thinking, highlights the positive impact of cognitive processes such as problem solving, accurate interpretation of environmental information, and reading social cues, being able to read social cues. Slow thinking in dogs takes us from this, and this is a Pharaoh hound who is expressing his arousal, his, I guess, heightened emotional state to this Jack Russell Terrier. Who knows what the actual situation is, but this scene is all too familiar. If you spend a lot of time around dogs, you will see this quite frequently. So we want to go from this to this. And this was the photo I used for my announcement of the talk. And it's funny. You don't often think of dogs having Zoom sessions with their buddies, but a slow thinking dog might do that. Who knows? But you get the idea. Slow thinking actually enables appropriate social interactions. So the motto for a lot of what I do in this larger project that I'm engaged in is changing behavior by changing thinking. If you change thinking, you have an excellent chance of changing behavior in both human and non-human animals. And I have to say that much of my larger cognitive behavioral interventions for canine aggression program has been inspired by several anti-aggression programs that have been created for at-risk youth. Some of these include the Brain Power program, the Becoming a Man program, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, the Pro-Social program, and all of these programs take the cognitive aspects of aggressive behavior very seriously, and all teach slow thinking as a central part of their therapeutic anti-aggression behavior programs. So what is cognition? This is like a little sidebar because I want to define it at least the way I'm using it. And I take a pretty broad swath with my definition. I follow Sarah Shuttleworth's definition. She is does comparative animal cognition. Very well-known scientist, practitioner. And in her definition, cognition is basically information processing. And I would say this is the widely accepted definition nowadays. Cognition is information processing. It is the array of mechanisms by which animals acquire, process, store, and act on input, which is information, from the environment. And some of these mechanisms include perception, learning, memory, and decision-making. I also highlight and actually intentionally include problem solving in most of my training program as a cognitive exercise. So cognition is information processing, and it's the way animals take in information from the environment and then use that information to interpret and respond to their experiences. I want to just touch briefly on the Becoming a Man program, which I have found very resonant for the work I'm doing with slow thinking, particularly. It's an anti-aggression program for at-risk youth that was created by an organization called Youth Guidance. And it's actually been introduced and by now is very well known in the US cities of Chicago and Boston. It's a school-based counseling program that guides primarily at-risk young men in the 7th through 12th grade. So that's like junior high through high school in the US at least, to learn, internalize, and practice social cognitive skills, make responsible decisions for their future, and become positive members of their communities. And it's their learning, internalizing, and practicing social cognitive skills that I have found very enlightening and revealing. So this is how the Becoming a Man program talks about itself. And the first part of this is it is non-coercive. Another way to say that, it's non-prescriptive. It doesn't offer a blueprint. It does not tell these students, these young participants, how to respond. It does not give them a blueprint. What it actually does is teach them to slow down and think about the best way to respond in a particular context. And they use all kinds of strategies to facilitate this. They play games. The fist game is one of them. They do role playing. They have one-on-one mentoring. So there are many different routes to teach this, but the salient point is they're not telling students what to do. They're actually allowing students to think through, giving them the time to actually problem solve and come up with the best way to respond to whatever their particular context is. Some of the core values are learning and practicing impulse control, emotional self-regulation, recognition of social cues and interpreting the intentions of others, raising aspirations for the future, and developing a sense of personal responsibility and integrity. Now, this program, at least in Chicago, has been around long enough for data studies to have been done on it, longitudinal studies of participants that have gone through it. And they've discovered it is actually highly successful. It reduced violent crime arrests by more than half, by more than 50%. And it reduced overall arrests by 35%. And it increased the high school graduation rate of participants by almost 20%. And in any program, those are really awesome statistics. So they did run this program. It actually worked extremely well. I don't have any statistics for the Boston version of it, but this is from the Chicago version. So the way I would describe what they were doing with this group of at-risk youth is teaching them the slow thinking process of cognitive reappraisal. Slow thinking as cognitive reappraisal. If emotions, and this is a quote from Eloise Stark, if emotions prompt rapid responses, cognitive reappraisal is the ability to move slowly, reevaluate our initial reaction. This slower process allows us to regulate our own emotions and respond more appropriately to situations. There is evidence that the slow process of cognitive reappraisal can be good for us, and she means humans, human animals. Successful reappraisal lowers measures of negative emotions and is linked with long-term improvements in everyday functioning. And in a couple of slides from now, I show some data to back this up. But this is cognitive reappraisal. It is a re-evaluating our initial reaction, often one that is motivated by fast thinking, such as our original scenario of the person with the angry face. And cognitive reappraisal is not just for humans. Like humans, dogs also engage in slow thinking. Especially if we teach them to, as well as cognitive reappraisal. And this enables dogs to recognize the social cues and interpret the intentions of scary stimuli, whatever those are, other dogs, joggers, kids on skateboards, men wearing hats, who knows, more accurately and calmly. So before I go any further, because I always get this question, or it's one that probably is on people's minds, can we really talk about dogs thinking, whether it's fast or slow? And the answer is absolutely yes. Dogs do think, but dogs don't think like humans. So it's important to note that describing dogs as using fast or slow thinking doesn't mean that they're thinking in human terms, that is, using verbal language. They are not thinking linguistically. Instead, it means that that dogs, like humans, process and interpret environmental information and then make decisions using this information in extraordinarily sophisticated and often similar ways to humans. The use of social referencing is one way that I've talked about and actually written about. So in other venues, in other presentations, and in some of my published work on this, I talk about cognitive parity. Dogs do not think like humans, but there is an often startling cognitive parity in terms of the way that we process information and how we use that information and respond to it. Well, what is cognitive reappraisal? I'm a visual learner, so I've always got to have a visual metaphor for anything. And this is the visual metaphor. It is the well-traveled ski track. This is the fast thinking track. Every thought consists of a complex interaction between proteins in the body and other chemicals, gene expressions, as well as the neural connections in our brain. Synapses, you can think of those as like well-traveled pathways when we're using an habitual behavior. And the more one repeats a thought, the stronger this circuit becomes, or the deeper this track, the ski track, becomes, because it's just easier to ski down a ski track that is well traveled. So according to neuroscientist Alex Korb, a well-developed thought is like a ski track in the snow. The more you ski down a path, the easier it is to go down that path and not another. But with practice, you can actually create a new path. You can reappraise this path, make a little detour, and actually change your direction. And this is what is called cognitive reappraisal. The result will be stronger neural networks facilitating positive thoughts, or what Korb calls a happier brain. If we're thinking about aggressive behavior in dogs, we might think about a dog whose default mode is low arousal, calmness, ability to look at new and ambiguous stimuli and not immediately think, using fast twitch thinking, that that stimulus is threatening, dangerous, and gonna hurt me. This is just a really quick dip into the neurobiology of cognitive reappraisal. And I thought it was important to include this because we all know about the amygdala, right? If you deal with reactive dogs, or dogs with aggression issues, or dogs with noise phobia, or dogs with pretty much any significant behavior issue, you have heard about the amygdala, because this is the center, the core of the fear, anxiety, stress system in both human and canine bodies. And what the amygdala does is very often bypass the prefrontal cortex. Now, dogs, like humans, have a prefrontal cortex. It is configured a little differently than humans. It's not as big and complex, but in my mind, dogs have other cognitive abilities that feed into that. But that is why, for example, the scientific debate is out on whether dogs can use third order thinking or experience third order emotions like jealousy. But nevertheless, they certainly experience fear, high arousal, anxiety, stress, and that is facilitated and enabled by this fast track amygdala and actually the whole limbic system, which includes the hippocampus and the other organisms. Why am I bringing this up? Because studies have been done, 2014, for example, that really showed that cognitive reappraisal can directly influence amygdala circuitry. And we know this because of the advances that many fields have made in using awake neuroimaging, such as functional MRI and positron emission tomography, these new ways of actually seeing the body. And just as an aside, I think it also makes what counts as observable behavior much more ambiguous. So the behaviorist paradigm that currently dominates dog training is in for a huge revision about what counts as observable behavior. If we can now see what's happening in the brain when cognitive reappraisal actually decreases the negative effects that the amygdala can have. And usually it's the amygdala bypassing the prefrontal cortex, which is the center of thought in animals. But in this case, it is the work of cognitive reappraisal that is influencing the amygdala. And this 2014 study used healthy human individuals and showed that cognitive reappraisal actually led to a fairly noticeable decrease in amygdala activation in response to negative stimuli. Very, very interesting study. Fortunately, we don't all need to turn into neurobiologists. We have Kathy Murphy for that, but we can at least know about the studies that give us some hope for new and maybe more effective ways of addressing our dog's behavior issues. Well, what does this mean for dogs? Slow thinking in the form of cognitive reappraisal offers a powerful lifeline to dogs who worry about the environment and use fast twitch thinking to make bad decisions about their behavior. And they are doing this all the time. This is a deeply habitual fast twitch thinking. So the program that I have developed and that I am still in the very early stages of thinking through makes cognitive reappraisal of the environment and indeed all scary stimuli a central and explicit strategy of behavior change. And I do this in several ways. First of all, I do it by emphasizing default behaviors. This is a more general category, but I want dogs to become independent problem solvers so that they can assess new and ambiguous stimuli and respond appropriately in the absence of any cues from their humans. So apropos of that, I teach dogs what I call the emotional and cognitive habits of low arousal and calmness, so that when life becomes too stressful, or they see scary stimuli, or they're in a situation that they don't understand, they can then draw on these habits and offer calmness, low arousal, as if it were just a second nature response. So these habits empower dogs with a genuine independence and agency. And this is in situations where I would imagine most of these dogs previously felt clearly at risk, but also pretty powerless to do anything but give stop signals. And the stop signals are the barking, the lunging, the growling. And of course, if we ignore the stop signals or other dogs ignore the stop signals, you might have fighting or an incident of biting. So first strategy is teaching dogs default behaviors. Second strategy is what I call edge work learning. And I'm in the process of developing what I want to call an edge work curriculum, right? So if you're a mountain climber or a rock climber, you'll recognize this term edge work. This is a known sociological concept. And I just want to say, I'm not really using it in that sense. You'll find a lot of discussion if you Google this term, because it refers to people who are danger seekers. These are the people who go rock climbing with no safety net, who are, jumping off 2,000-foot cliffs and hand gliding down, who are skateboarding down a 1,500-foot mountain. Those people, I'm not one of them. Nor do I want my dogs to do that either. But edge work learning means that dogs do experience some mild structured stress. And I want to emphasize that at levels that allow them to make good decisions, to make decisions appropriately, and to expand their comfort level in progressive steps. And I want to thank Dr. Chris Pickell for actually, I came across this term during a veterinary behavior consult that I was doing with him and a client, and it just clicked. So thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. Here are some of the training games that I use to facilitate edge work experiences. The paper plate game, which is also called Super Bowls. This is a Control Unleashed pattern game that I've adapted for this. The Dizlack game, which I'll say a lot more about in a minute. And any game that helps dogs to learn to think before they act. So some of the games that I've also incorporated have been, and you'll see one of these in the final video for the presentation, is circle walking, as presented by Denise Fenzi. I use circle walking actually a fair amount. And also an absolute dogs game called the mouse game. Two very useful games that help dogs learn to think before they act. So this could be the poster for a lot of what I'm doing with dogs, and especially what I'm talking about today. Don't underestimate the power of silence. You'll be surprised by what your dog can accomplish if you give them a moment to think. Why would I put this in? Because I feel like, especially if you have an aggressive or a hyper-reactive dog, our tendency is to micromanage every move, right? We micromanage every move because we feel like we have to. And yes, of course, you have to use safety mechanisms, manage for safety, all that. Yes, I get that. But I take to heart this quote by Daniel Mills and Helen Zuch in one of my favorite general dog training books called Helping Minds Meet, meaning human and canine minds. And this is the quote: if we give instruction to our dogs all the time, they may become very obedient. But too much instruction means a dog does not get into the habit of paying much attention to his environment, which can limit his tendency to adapt to other individuals and situations without being asked. The key to impulse control is that appropriate and desirable behavior is the dog's decision, rather than under the control of someone telling him what to do. And my favorite chapter from that book is the chapter called Life is Generally Better If We Can Both Learn to Think Before We Act. Anyway, this could be the prelude to, but it is certainly the prelude to the way I've created and adapted some of the games to facilitate what I call edge work learning. So the first game is the paper plate game. And this is a, as I said, a control and leash pattern game, now called Super Bowls. But I started using it when it was first presented, and I started calling it the paper plate game. So I just stuck with that name. And the video you're going to see is from one of my in-person control and leash classes. I only do behavior. And so I don't teach general dog training classes. I do one-on-one behavior consults, but I do teach control and leash classes, both online and, when we're able, in person. And this is from one of my last in-person classes. And here you'll see Quincy, a 2-year-old border collie with a history of biting men. He had not a huge history with bites to men, but a significant one. And also extreme hyper-reactivity to other dogs. So you will see in control and leash classes, I separate the dogs into, each has an individual station. And usually there's barriers in between, there's visual blockers on the barriers. And in this game, in the paper plate game, Quincy is exposed to the dog next door for the very first time, because the cloth covering was partially removed from the barriers separating the station. I thought he was ready for this, but we didn't know actually how he would react. And this is also the very first time that Quincy played the paper plate game. So let me just stop the video for a minute here. My video is playing fine. I'm not sure. Sometimes with PowerPoint, when it comes through on Zoom to another computer, the video can look pretty choppy. So I can actually leave viewing links to the videos if you're not really able to see it in the quality that you want to see it, if that is happening. I can't see what's happening on Facebook Live, but from my end, it looks fine. So this is Quincy. The way you play this game, you put a little jackpot of treats on a paper plate, the dog eats it, and you just wait. This is also teaching the Quincy default behaviors, default reorienting and focus on my human, no matter what is going on the periphery of the game. So you put a little jackpot on the paper plate, and then you wait until Quincy offers default reorienting. It does not have to be direct eye contact. I just want him to look in my direction. And that is a cue to the human. Yes, take me to the next visual target, which is the next paper plate. Okay, did you just see that head turn? That is a very important head turn. And this is when we see Quincy learning, actually in the act of learning cognitive reappraisal, because he glances briefly in the direction of the other dog who is right behind this barrier. And actually that dog was, glued up against the barrier watching what Quincy was doing. And so maybe even 6 months previously, Quincy would have been screaming, scrambling over the barriers, trying to get to that dog. Here, he just gives a glance, and his response is, oh, well, yes, I see that dog, but I don't need to defend myself or do anything about it. I'm going to stay engaged with my human. And this is absolutely the moment when cognitive reappraisal, slow thinking, becomes salient for Quincy. He reframes the situation and instead exhibits an alternate non-aroused behavior. So I'm not going to show the whole video, but I want to just show a little more of it so you get a flavor of what the game is like. There's the head turn. So he's not noticing that the cover has been removed from the ring gate. Good. So Quincy's human was saying, yes, he did look at the dog. It was a turn halfway in the direction of the dog, and then he made a good choice. He reframed the situation, and he decided, nope, I see that dog. I don't need to do anything about it. This was an awesome moment for Quincy. So the Dizlack game, and I couldn't resist, little pun, living on the edge work game. The dis and the lat have distinct meanings. The dis stands for disengagement, and I have adapted the control and leash protocol, the look at that game, to much more explicitly feature disengagement. While the turn away was always a part of the look at that game, I want to teach it much more explicitly and actually use structured exercises to do this. So I've been talking about disengagement for years. It's become a word that is now current in dog training. And I like to say, well, before it was current, I was talking about disengagement. And so this is a quote from me, from something I wrote and published back in 2018, and something I had been saying for years, that teaching a dog to disengage from the concerning stimulus is just as, and maybe even more important than teaching them to look calmly at it, because we want dogs to literally learn how to turn away emotionally and physically from the triggers in front of them. So that's the DIS part. The LAT part, of course, is the look at that. It's a variation on the original look at that protocol. And as I said, I've adapted it to teach dogs how to notice what is happening in their environment, and then much more explicitly focus on teaching them that turning away or disengaging causes great things to happen. So I'm gonna show you a couple of videos of the DISLAT game, and my subject here is Moxon. Moxon is a 4-year-old, 80-pound neutered husky German Shepherd mix that I worked with for a little over a year. His owner was a 4th-year veterinary student who originally called me in 2019 after Moxon had attacked several other dogs, and also on walks was wanting to go after every dog he saw on leash. But he contacted me right before this vet student needed to go abroad because he had a veterinary internship. And so he left before we could arrange an evaluation. He called me again in January 2020 after Moxon had broken through fencing at his home and run across the street and attacked a small dog owned by a neighbor. And when the owner actually got to Moxon, he was delivering a kill shake to the dog. Fortunately, the little dog had no lasting severe injuries, partly because there was a vet on site, but partly because they were able to get Moxon away from that dog. However, the owner did tell me he's pretty sure if he had not been able to get Moxon away, that he probably would have killed that dog. So this is a dog with pretty severe dog aggression issues. With humans, he was a total love bug. So he had a real cognitive dissonance in this regard about what was threatening and what wasn't. So this is Moxon, one of the very first times he's doing the DISLAT game, and I'm going to show you what that involves. It teaches dogs how to problem solve in ambiguous situations. That is why I really like it. It teaches them how to problem solve. And then also on the second video, we'll see how it teaches slow thinking as cognitive reappraisal. But here, the ambiguous situation is we're throwing a treat out and the dog is on leash, and we're throwing it out beyond his ability to access the food reward. And then we wait. And when the dog, for whatever reason, finally says, okay, enough of that, I'm turning away, we reward the turn away, and then we incorporate what I describe as a system of layered rewards. One is movement, because many dogs just find movement rewarding. Second is gaining distance from the trigger. Okay, probably not from the highly desirable food reward, but remember that's standing in for every potentially scary trigger that Moxon could see. And then, of course, a jackpot at the end. So movement from the trigger to a distance of about 5 feet, and then a jackpot using very high value treats at the end of the movement. So this is the game. And I'm gonna talk you through it. The Moxon's owner has thrown out a really good treat, and Moxon is thinking. He's just really, he's thinking, why can't I get that treat? How can I get that treat? And then finally, he turns to his human, and what is rewarded is the turn away, the disengagement, and then he gets access to the layered rewards. And then gradually you would generalize this game. You would do it inside in a no low distraction environment first, but then you would do it outside on the porch, out in the backyard. I actually had them doing this on walks, just randomly. And then you incorporate real life objects. We don't ask the dog to disengage directly from the real life object. What we do is toss a treat toward the object. And then by that time, the dog has presumably had maybe hundreds, if not thousands of repetitions of you throw the treat, I turn away. But of course he sees the real life stimulus in the distance. So this next video is about, I don't know, I want to say 7 months from the video we just saw. And we were doing training in the parking lot of our local dog park. I never go in the dog park, but I do a lot of training in the parking lot. And we were up on a grassy knoll, just actually chilling out for a little bit, when suddenly a person walking a small dog on a leash cut in front of us, suddenly crossed our path. And I actually advocate turning everything into a learning opportunity. So I quickly asked Moxon's human to toss a high value food reward toward the dog and the person walking the dog. In other words, we were going to do the Dizlack game. As I said, we wouldn't yet ask Moxon to disengage from the scary stimulus itself, but the reward tossed toward the stimulus, yes. And this is what happened.
Run a little bit and scatter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does he have to decide though?
Yes. And wait till let's see if he can disengage. You might cheat a little bit by making a kissy. Yes. That was fabulous. I mean, because the dog is right there.
Yeah.
All right, let's do that again. Let's do that again. Good. So this, you are seeing a breakthrough moment happening. I certainly didn't expect this, and I know the owner didn't. This was actually amazing. Moxon, instead, you can see slow thinking reappraisal at work. He looked toward the small dog. He thought about it for a minute, and he said, nope, I'm not going to do anything about it. That's none of my concern. I don't feel threatened. I am just going to turn away. And he actually disengaged before we did much. That is how fluent this behavior had become. And then the second time, we didn't even have to throw the treat. he disengages on his own. And that is where you see the effects of our having practiced the circle walking game quite frequently with Moxon. That is, we taught him every time I see anything stressful or scary, anything that looks like a small dog, I actually just circle away from it. And you saw Moxon circling away. As I've said in other venues, I actually cried when this happened. And I know the owner did too, because this was a dog he had felt a lot of despair over. Did this resolve all of Moxon's issues? Of course not. No, he was still wearing a muzzle every time he went out on a leash walk. We were still using robust management for safety. We were still continuing his training. But this is a magnitude of behavior change that I honestly don't think I ever would have achieved if I had just used traditional desensitization counter conditioning. And if I had just stuck with the traditional behaviorist paradigm, which I think is really valuable. I'm all for using observable behavior, but it doesn't always give us the results that we need and want. So I'm going to stop the share here. I actually am not sure what's going to happen. I really hope that I can, that this will take me to the Facebook Live, but I don't know. Yeah, so good. I'm seeing your comments. I'm seeing your comments. The videos looked a little choppy, but not bad. So thank you for joining me. I guess I'm a little over my time, but if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to, go to my website and send me a contact form, and I'll be happy to have further conversations about it. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon. All right. Bye-bye.